They sent my brother to college with my savings, then blamed me for not going to college. They said the money would be waiting for me, that each birthday check I left untouched, each extra shift at the auto shop after school, each lawn I mowed while my classmates sunned themselves on weekends, all of it was for me. They swore up and down that it was a sacred little fund, a hidden vault behind the curtain of family sacrifice, building slowly, patiently, like some hidden tree growing in the dark. A reward for my restraint, a beacon toward a better future. They even gave it a name. Your college money. My name was on it in spirit, if not on paper. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? I remember once, I caught my reflection in the shop window of Grover's Market, grease on my fingers, my back hunched from hauling boxes of bottled water after school. I was 16, hungry, bone-tired, but grinning like I'd cracked some secret code. My friends were off chasing girls at the mall or huddled around a PS4. Me? I was hustling, grinding, because I knew where I was going. And that fund, that invisible promise, it was the fuel behind every skipped summer trip, every second job I said yes to, every impulse I swallowed down because my time was coming. I could feel it like a distant train rumbling down a track. But then it shifted, quietly, brutally, without fanfare. My brother, Elliot, got into Bramford University, last minute, a miracle acceptance, the kind of thing that sparks family dinners filled with clinking glasses and tear-streaked cheeks. Your brother, the first to get into a private school, they said, as if I hadn't already been accepted into 2 state colleges. He needs the support. He needs the experience. He's your younger brother, they said, as if birth order reversed financial justice. The shift came as a whisper, a single conversation in a cramped kitchen. My father leaning against the counter, arms crossed like a foreman overseeing some damned merger, while my mother stirred pasta she didn't seem interested in serving. It's family money, they said. You'll understand one day. Their words floated like a fog of betrayal, light enough to breathe in but thick enough to choke on. I didn't yell, didn't demand. I simply nodded and left the room, my bones humming with fury, the same fury that kept me working when it would have been easier to collapse. They didn't tell me when the last cent of my so-called college fund disappeared into Elliot's orientation fees, or the dorm setup costs, or his books, or maybe even the dorm fridge he barely used. They didn't explain the logistics because they didn't feel they had to. I was the one they expected to understand, to solve problems, to navigate life without training wheels. You're smart, they told me. You'll figure something out. I did. I built a life out of rejection. Not the soft kind that comes with an apology and a pat on the shoulder, but the kind that carves holes into your trust and leaves silence where a future used to be. I skipped college, not by choice, not out of fear, but because I couldn't afford the illusion anymore. Instead, I took every ounce of discipline they had praised in me and turned it against the very pedestal they put my brother on. I taught myself, through late-night forums, pirated PDF manuals, and relentless experimentation. I coded until my eyes bled lines of syntax. I learned marketing by running campaigns for products I didn't believe in. I ate ramen until I could barely stand the smell of soy. And slowly, something grew. The company wasn't supposed to be a company at first, just a side gig. A freelancer's gamble. One client became 2, then 10, then 100. I built systems, hired contractors, turned it into an engine that didn't require a pedigree. My name wasn't followed by letters from a university, but it echoed through boardrooms and brand meetings. It became someone no one could ignore, even if they still tried. Elliot graduated with honors in communications, a polished resume and nowhere to go. He moved back home for a while, applying to jobs he was overqualified for and ignored by all the same. The debt crushed him like a vice. Every month another reminder that his dream came pre-packaged with chains. And when he complained, when he started muttering about how unfair it all was, I said nothing. I just watched. It was around then my parents started shifting their narrative. Suddenly my absence from college became a mystery, a wound I'd inflicted upon myself. Why didn't you go to school like your brother? They'd ask, as if they hadn't rerouted the river of my future into his hands, as if I'd simply forgotten to enroll. And I realized, standing in my glass-walled office, overlooking the city they thought I'd never conquer, that they'd erased my sacrifices in their own story. I'd become the anomaly, the successful dropout, The black sheep who'd wandered off the map and somehow stumbled into gold. They wanted to rewrite history, to frame my ascent as luck rather than vengeance. But I remembered. Every dollar I gave up, every shift I dragged myself through, every decision I made under the illusion of a promise they never intended to keep. And they remember too, though not in the way they'd admit. I see it in the hesitation in their voices when they call, in the way they introduce me at family gatherings, stumbling over my title because it doesn't fit neatly into their narrative. I see it in the way my brother avoids eye contact, ashamed without knowing why, indebted in more ways than his loans can quantify. They sent him to college on my back, and now I stand taller, wealthier, freer, untethered by their vision, shaped only by my own. And funny, isn't it? How they forgot where the money came from. But they'll never forget where I ended up without it. They never apologized. Not once. Not even a clumsy half-apology buried in a joke or awkward deflection over coffee. They talked around it like it was an old wound that healed without leaving a scar, as if silence could soften the sting of betrayal. But the thing about silence, it doesn't erase anything. It just lets the guilt rot quietly under the floorboards, stinking up everything even if no one's willing to lift the rug and face it. By the time my company was making enough to open a second office, Elliot was still living at home, splitting time between job applications and freelance gigs that barely covered his car insurance. My parents had started talking in murmurs, tiptoeing around his presence like he was a sleeping dog they didn't want to startle. He'd grown pale, gaunt even, his confidence leaching out of him like rain soaking through a cardboard box. It wasn't just the loans. It was the realization that the world didn't care about his degree, his honors, or the big dreams they'd spoon-fed him. They'd treated his education like a lottery ticket, the golden escape hatch that would redeem everything. And when the world responded with indifference, they didn't know where to aim their disappointment, certainly not at themselves. Instead, they defaulted to the same place they always did. Me. I still remember the first time my father said it out loud, one evening when I visited the house after a year. He'd invited me over under the illusion of a family dinner. But the table was quiet, the air thick with things left unsaid. Elliot wasn't there, probably off somewhere pretending to be busy. My father poured himself a drink, cheap mocktail, the kind he used to save for Sundays. He didn't offer me any. That was fine. I didn't come to be comforted. He stared into his glass like it held some answer he hadn't earned. Then he muttered it, barely louder than the clink of ice. You know, you could have gone to college if you'd tried harder. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, watched his mouth twitch, watched the gears turning as he tried to believe his own revisionist nonsense. He couldn't face what they'd done, so he built a world where I was the ungrateful one, the wanderer who chose the woods over the road. If I'd tried harder, I finally said, my voice colder than the drink in his hand. You mean if I'd been better at accepting getting screwed over? He flinched, just slightly, but didn't say anything. My mother looked up from her plate, eyes glassy, lips parting like she wanted to explain, but no words came. Because what explanation could she possibly give that wouldn't make them look worse? That they believed in Elliot more? That they thought I'd survive just fine without help? So they gave it all to the one they feared would drown? They never said it aloud, but it echoed in every choice they made. They were scared of him failing. And they were certain I wouldn't. But survival doesn't mean forgiveness. It doesn't mean their choices evaporated the second I got my first client, or when the first wire transfer came through for a 5-figure job they couldn't even pronounce the name of. I didn't succeed because of them. I succeeded in spite of them. And the quiet, awkward dinners they invited me to now were nothing more than staged acts of normalcy, their way of pretending they hadn't rerouted my life for someone else. I think my brother knew it too. We ran into each other by accident 2 months later. I was walking into a co-working space downtown, one I partially funded through a silent investor deal, and he was coming out with a folder under his arm, dressed like he'd borrowed someone else's idea of professionalism. He looked thinner, older, but still tried to flash that same half-smile he'd used since we were kids, like he could disarm guilt with charm. "Hey," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." "Likewise." He shifted his weight, rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when he was trying to buy time. "Just finished an interview. Social media coordinator. Contract part-time, but, gotta get in somewhere." I nodded but didn't say anything. He looked like he wanted more than silence, maybe even approval or sympathy. But I had nothing left to give him. Then he said it. Just like that. Like he was testing the words out to see if they still held power. Mom and Dad think you hate them. I didn't laugh, though it would have been easy. Instead, I met his gaze, steady and level. They spent my future on you, Elliot. What exactly do they expect? He blinked, lips parting like he might protest. But he didn't. He just looked away, chewing on the truth like it had bones in it. I didn't ask for it, he said quietly. No. But you didn't refuse it either. There it was, the line that cut clean through both our lives. He didn't take the knife from their hands, but he didn't stop them from cutting with it either. He let them bleed me dry because it was easier to accept the help than to question why it wasn't his to begin with. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always come with shouting matches or broken plates. Sometimes it's as quiet as signing a tuition check with someone else's sweat soaked into the ink. We parted ways without shaking hands. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, the one with skyline views and custom everything, and I looked out over the city they never imagined I'd conquer. I thought about how easy it would have been to turn bitter, to let the rage calcify into hate. But I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove anything. I was already proof, living, breathing, undeniable. Let them squirm in the stories they've told themselves. Let them twist and turn in the discomfort of knowing they bet on the wrong son and still lost. Let them wonder how far I'll go now that I no longer owe them anything, not even a goodbye. It started with a phone call, a simple, innocuous ring that cut through a mid-morning meeting like the cold edge of memory. My mother's name blinked on the screen, and for a moment I hovered between decline and answer, suspended in the quiet weight of history. I hadn't heard her voice in months, not since the last family dinner where I barely spoke, where my silence did more damage than any raised voice ever could. But something about the timing, about that name appearing on my phone again after so much distance, made me swipe to answer. "Hey," she said. Just that. The word came brittle, like her throat had turned to glass. "What's going on?" I asked. There was a pause, the kind that says everything before a single syllable is spoken. Then, "It's your father." The old man had suffered a mild stroke, not life-threatening, not catastrophic, just enough to rattle their world, to force time to lean in and whisper that none of this lasts forever. He'd been discharged already, back home, but weaker, slower, less sure of things he used to speak about with iron certainty. "He's asking for you," she said. Of course he was. 2 days later, I stood in the very living room where they'd once celebrated Elliot's acceptance letter with mocktail they wouldn't have bought for me if I'd been accepted to the moon. The same room where I'd once overheard them whispering about how I'd figure it out, as if my resilience was a bank they could always borrow from. He was in the recliner now, a fleece blanket thrown over legs that once climbed roofs to fix leaks without hesitation. His eyes looked smaller, not just from the stroke, but from the accumulated shrinking that happens when a man sees his children grow into something he no longer controls. "Look who's here," my mother said, retreating quickly into the kitchen after placing her hands on my shoulder. Too light, too late. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, watching him. "You came," he muttered. "Yeah. I didn't know if you would." "Well, you did name me the smart one. Thought I'd make the rational choice." A smirk flickered across his face, small, reluctant, the kind that knew it had earned nothing. He gestured at the couch beside him, and I sat. "Been thinking a lot," he said slowly, like each word came with a receipt. "About how we handled things." That word again. We. The ever-convenient umbrella for shared guilt. I didn't correct him. "I don't think we did right by you," he added. "No," I said, voice flat. "You didn't." He nodded, that same subtle bow of the head he'd used when conceding a point in poker. "I thought Elliot needed it more, that he couldn't make it without the help. And me?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "I thought you were unbreakable." A breath left my chest. Not laughter, not even a sigh. Just air. "You used my future like it was a fire extinguisher. Just broke the glass when things got urgent." "I know. Do you?" He turned his head toward me, slower than before, weaker, but there was still some steel left behind his eyes. I knew it back then too. I just didn't want to admit it. There it was. Not an apology, not really. But it was the closest thing I was going to get. I could feel it in my bones. The heaviness of recognition. And I realized in that moment I didn't need him to crawl or beg or break down. I didn't need him to weep or write me a check he couldn't cash. What I needed, what I had waited years for, was this. That still moment when he no longer pretended it hadn't happened. He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out an envelope. Worn, creased at the edges, like it had been taken out and looked at too many times. Been putting some money aside, he said, little by little. Your mother didn't even know. I wanted to give it back. I know it's not close to what we used, but I wanted to try. I took the envelope, opened it. There were stacks of cash, organized, clean, unassuming, $25,000, maybe more. A gesture far too late to fix anything but still meaningful in its small way. I held it for a moment, then placed it on the coffee table without a word. Keep it, I said. You're going to need it more than me. But I don't need anything from you anymore. It wasn't pride. It wasn't cruelty. It was just the truth. I had built everything from the wreckage they'd left me in. I'd carved a place in the world so far removed from theirs that I didn't even recognize the blueprints anymore. They were the foundation I'd buried under new concrete, and that was fine. I forgive you, I added, standing, but I won't forget. He nodded again, slower this time. When I stepped into the hallway, Elliot was there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I heard the whole thing, he said. Good. He looked at me, then at the door I'd just walked out of. You think things can ever go back to normal? There was never a normal, I replied. Just a version of the story you all liked better. He pushed off the wall. I'm trying, you know. I'm working. I'm paying the loans. I didn't ask for all this. I know. But you took it. And you didn't give anything back. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Maybe he finally understood. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. I walked out of that house for the last time with nothing in my hands and everything I needed already earned. My car waited in the driveway, the engine humming like a quiet promise. I slid behind the wheel, turned the ignition, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. There was no revenge to chase, no wound left open, no fire still burning. Just a man who'd built himself from everything they'd buried. They gave him the money. I gave myself the world. And in the end, only one of us could afford the price of regret.